Hello, welcome to this episode of the Martial Truth Podcast. Was on vacation last week. Had my 60th birthday, so I'm now a 60-year-old. Okay, feel pretty good though, so that's good. Again, want to mention closing in on 12,000 subscribers. Really appreciate it. Channel's growing. It's growing slowly, but that's fine. I'm not interested in having gazillion subscribers, but we're closing in on 12,000. We have 75 subscribers now, members of the channel rather, 75 members. I hope you consider becoming a member. It's only $2.99 a month. You get this podcast with no commercials. You get it a little bit early than everybody else. And then the instructional videos. I mean, so far up there, I have instructional videos up there for Jiu-Jitsu, Ishinru Karate, Chen Style Tai Chi Chuan Practical Method, and Mariyoshi Kobudo. And we dropping at least one video a week, but normally it's 2 videos a week. And we have things like the Masters series, where I'm editing video of very high level masters, and you could see them doing a form or them teaching something. And then we're going to be starting soon too, also mini lessons, where I'm going to take a particular subject, for example, like Ki. How to ki and explain exactly what a ki is and relate it to different martial arts. So we got a lot of different things going on. And then as we got a little more members and we hit maybe that like 100 member mark, then we'll start doing some live stuff. We'll be doing some live broadcasts on YouTube. All right, so that's something to look forward to. So think about joining, and remember, click that like. Please share the videos. It helps a lot. So, violence. This is a subject. Years ago, I was attending some practical method workshops up in Canada, and Master Chen Zhanghua had asked me to give a lecture to all the Tai Chi people that were in attendance on what real combat was like what happens when you really have to defend yourself, what it's like. Most people, modern people now, luckily, have not experienced violence, real violence. Again, the violence in the dojo is pretend violence. It's not real violence. Unless you're have had one of those situations where someone walks in the school and attacks you, that's a different story. And this does happen. It 100% happens, okay? But then that's real violence. I'll give you an example. I was teaching a seminar several years ago on Long Island, and a guy, I was talking to 2 young children, 7 years old, 8 years old. They'd asked me a question about the technique I taught. My seminar was over, so it was afterwards. They were asking me, I'm standing there talking to the kids, and a guy grabs me in a rear naked choke from the rear, just attacks me out of the blue. Let's just say that he didn't enjoy my response. Especially when he screamed. So at lunch later on that day, I was sitting there with a whole bunch of my students, and a couple of my students were fellow police officers. They worked with me. So they'd seen me fight for real on numerous occasions. So for them, it was no big deal. But for the other students, the students had only seen me move in the dojo, they were all kind of quiet. And finally I said, we're laughing, and they're all sitting there quiet. I said, what's going on? He goes, Sensei, we got to be honest with you. We never saw you move like that. And I said, well, when it's real, it's different. And you will move differently when it's real. You would think you were moving fast in the dojo, and everybody says how fast you are, how powerful you are. But when real violence occurs and you have to respond to it in a real way, there's a lot of things that go on that enhance your speed, enhance your power, okay, and make you move in a very different way. Now, this can be good and this can be bad, because if you don't have that under control, your abilities can begin to kind of go off the rails, where you're not moving in the way you should and you're all over the place. But if you're able to focus your violence properly, then it becomes something very different from the way you're moving in the dojo. Real violence is ugly. You need to realize that. Forget what you're seeing on TV. Even now, TV and movies, even now with the more violent movies where, you see the blood going flying, you see limbs getting chopped off. It's still very stylized. It's not necessarily real. And it's not happening to you. Okay, that's the key. The key is we can watch it on the screen and we can just shrug it off and go, oh, this is just something I'm watching, right? Some people don't like that extreme violence on the screen. Other people enjoy it. For me, I can go either way, right? Some movies I see it and I'm like, yeah, that's a bit too much. And in other movies, I like the way they put the stylized violence together, all right? So real violence is very ugly. It's very dynamic. It's unexpected, all right? And someone who is used to real violence, like the predators of society. So, the predators of society are a very different animal. They prey on people. Who do they look to prey on? They look to prey on the people that are weaker than they are, okay? So if they think they can take advantage of you, they're going to do that. So, well, how do they take advantage? Well, there's all different ways they take advantage, right? For a while we had something going on called the knockout game where they would come up and from the side, they'd punch you in the face and knock you out, right? And then, a lot of times your pockets get rifled. They steal whatever on you, steal your watch, right? And then sometimes I saw videos where the person that knocked them out is not the person that robbed them. Someone else from the crowd comes over, takes the watch, takes the phone, takes the money, right? So again, you say, well, how do I prevent this? Well, you prevent this that when you're walking around, your head's got to be on a bit of a swivel. Especially now. Lawlessness in this country is on the rise. We're no longer punishing criminals in a lot of places. We're rewarding criminals. New York's a prime example. Crime's through the roof in New York. Don't believe what you're hearing with the stats, okay? Crimes are always dramatically underreported, okay? The only stat they can't fake is murder. Every other stat they can fake. So just keep that in mind, okay? Remember, I was a police officer for 22 years. I was friends with the guys that did the stats in my command, right? So, you need to understand violence is on the rise in this country, and until we decide that we're going to punish criminals and punish them where they're behind bars, it's going to continue to rise. When there's no repercussions, criminals take advantage. They fill the vacuum, all right? And what you need to realize is there's not a lot of criminals all over the place, right? It's a small, hard group of guys that commit all the crimes, okay? And, we used to say, we knew who the criminals were. We knew who they were. If they would let us eliminate them, right, there'd be virtually no crime. But in modern times, you can't do that. They want the police officer to be nice. They want them to talk the criminal into handcuffs. They don't want the police officer to have to physically make him go into handcuffs. This is called fantasy world. This is called unicorns and rainbows, which sadly, a lot of modern people, that's the fantasy world they live in. Oh, violence is never going to happen to me. Okay? I don't put myself in those positions. Yeah. Nobody that ever walks out of their house in the morning walks out saying to themselves, you know what, I think I'm going to get robbed today. You know what, I think someone's going to try to cut me today. You know what, I think someone's going to shoot me today. I think I'm going to go shopping at the mall, and I think an active shooter's going to show up. I think I'm going to go to my classroom, and there's going to be an active shooter in my school. Yeah, all those people wake up in the morning, and that's what they're thinking. No, none of them are thinking like that, okay? And then when it happens, it's a dramatic shock. So one of the things you want to realize when a violent encounter initially happens to you the first time, there's a dramatic shock factor. So that dramatic shock factor may result in you hesitating and you getting hit, you getting cut, okay? So you have to recover from that initial shock, okay? And then you have to go into the mode of, I have to stop this threat. I have to eliminate this threat. If I don't stop this threat, this person's going to probably kill me. This person's going to seriously harm me. When this happens, this initial shock, you will get an immediate dump of various chemicals into your body. All right, cortisol, adrenaline. Okay, so I can tell you from being in a lot of violent encounters, some of the ones that were more dramatic, when it was finished and I had the guy in handcuffs and, I was good, I wasn't hurt, whoever was with me wasn't hurt. Afterwards, my hands would be shaking like this. And initially, I didn't know what it was. Like the first few times, I was like, man, what's going on? Like I'd be trying to put my hands in my pockets because, I'm like this, I'm shaking, right? And then I realized what it was that chemical dump. This flood of adrenaline, this cortisol, all these different things that's going on. So one of the things you want to understand, some things that happen with our bodies, right, is that our blood vessels contract when we're going to be in a violent confrontation. You're not controlling it. This is what happens. You say, well, why does that happen? Well, it's through millions of years of evolution, right? Originally, you were getting cut. So your body decides, well, I'm going to get cut. So they're going to constrict the blood flow when you're engaged in a violent encounter. So doing that is, right? So, but also that restriction also kind of affects your wind and how fast you can breathe, because everything kind of does this initially, right? Without you knowing it, your testicles actually retract, okay? They retract into the body. So these, again, are all responses that are not responses you feel. They're not responses you're thinking about. They're involuntary responses. Your vision, too, can get very, very focused, right? Which is something you have to be a little bit careful of, because this idea of tunnel vision, where you have a small window that you're focusing on, which in this case may be the opponent that's directly in front of you, okay? But one of the things you learn when you're in a profession where violence is going to become normal, it's going to become normal. Real violence is going to become normal. Whether this is the military and you're actually in combat, or whether you're a police officer, okay? It becomes normal. So what you do is initially you may get that tunnel vision, right? And then other times, as it becomes more normal to you and you're more relaxed, right? Now that vision doesn't have a tendency to be so pinpoint focused on that opponent in the front. Now your vision can expand. Why is it important that your vision has to expand? Well, there may be more than one guy, okay? Forget this idea that it's going to be one-on-one. So in my dojo, in the empty hand arts, the ones that we train more seriously for real fighting, it's always there's more than one art. There's more than one opponent. Always. That's the thought process. And the idea is if there is only one opponent and it turns out there was only one, great. But we're assuming there's more than one. You have to deal with a guy with a weapon. You take his weapon. Let's say you do a technique, the weapon goes flying. You don't step back and say, okay, there's no more weapon, I'm good. You always assume there's a second weapon, okay? I couldn't tell you how many times I searched a criminal and I found multiple knives, okay? Found a gun and a knife, all right? Found a razor and a knife, okay? Found brass knuckles and a knife. So the idea is these assumptions that you might make. No. Same thing in the dojo. When you're training, you can't, any instructor that says, this will always work, or this will take the opponent out, this will 100% eliminate the threat. Anybody that says that is a fool. Because combat is a very, very interesting place to be. There is nothing normal with combat. It is total chaos. Okay? Total chaos. Martial arts don't necessarily exist in combat the way we think they do. Okay? When you're in a life and death struggle between you and the attacker, the idea is to win, to defeat the guy who's trying to cause you serious harm. If you're thinking about doing a certain technique, or, I'm going to try this, you're in big trouble. Because you can't think like that. Your body's just going to have to react. You're going to have to move. You're going to have to do things. Okay? This is why we want to train and train techniques over and over and over again to where that muscle memory is there. All right. I'll give you an example. When I knew I was going to become a police officer, I'd already had a bunch of fights. As a teenager growing up, even a guy in my early 20s, I'd had a bunch of actual encounters, right? But again, those fights, not necessarily life and death. The thing with being a police officer is, you lose the fight, there's a good chance they're going to take your gun and they're going to end your life. Okay? So that's something that's always in the back of every single police officer's mind. And you're taught from the get-go, you don't let your gun get taken. If you get your gun taken, you're in big trouble. Okay, I'll give a quick story in relation to that. One of my senior students, Ray Santiago, he was driving the sergeant one night, and a couple of people came up the stairs from the transit system. They happened to be sitting just upstairs from the transit. We were transit police officers at the time. They came up and they said the train was being robbed. Now think about this. This is the New York City subway system. You know how long the trains are. What is this, the Old West? The train's being robbed. So they get out. There's 2 different stairways to enter the system. So the sergeant goes down one and Ray Santiago goes down the other. Okay. They both encounter criminals. Right? Ray encounters a guy armed with a gun, but he already has his gun out, so he gets the drop on the guy. The guy immediately drops the gun. Turns out later it's a fake gun. Ray goes over, holsters his weapon. Why? Well, if you're going to handcuff the guy, you don't want to do it with a gun in your hand because he may get your gun. So he holsters his weapon, and now when he goes to handcuff the guy, what does the guy do? The guy tries to fight. Ray's been training with me for a long time. He takes the guy out, handcuffs him, no problem. So that's what's going on this stairway. On the other stairway, the sergeant runs into, the other thing I'll mention is Ray Santiago is in good shape, not overweight. The sergeant's very overweight. So now the sergeant runs into another guy who's literally only up to his shoulders. So the sergeant's a very large guy, big guy, right? Very overweight. He runs into a small guy, and he grabs the guy by his arm. Does he put him in handcuffs? Nope. Right? And he's walking him, holding his arm, like the sergeant's a big tough guy. Well, the guy that's half his size grabs him, and when they walk by one of the steel girders that supports the subway, the little guy smashes the sergeant into the steel girder, and the steel girder hits the sergeant here and splits his head from here to here. And when the sergeant bounces back, he falls flat on his back. So the next day, I interviewed the booth clerk. He said it looked like the sergeant was a turtle on his back. This is real violence, folks. This isn't make-believe. This isn't a movie, okay? This is what happens. Now the sergeant's head split open. He's dazed. He's on his back. What does the criminal do? The criminal reaches down and removes the sergeant's gun. He stands over the sergeant and points the gun at the sergeant's head. The sergeant begs for his life. The booth clerk saw it all. The sergeant got very lucky. The criminal decided not to assassinate him. Now the criminal goes upstairs to the street. Ray comes up to the middle platform where the sergeant's on his back. He can't get up. He's got his guy in handcuffs. Now he's going over to try to render aid. Now he hears shots fired. It had already come over the radio, not just our radio, but at the time the NYPD radio, that the train was being robbed. So there was backup was coming to the station. But so as the guy who took the sergeant's gun hit the top of the stairs, he saw the cops pulling up. He immediately opened fire. He fired shots at the cops right away. Again, showing you how lucky that sergeant was. Okay? Because he shot at those cops upstairs. So he flees. He gets caught. So you'd think, right? you have this near-death experience. You're in this job where violence becomes normal, and you're dealing with violence on a regular basis. You know how dangerous it is to you, right? You see that you could have been killed, right? Okay. Did that sergeant change his ways? Did he say to himself, you know what? I got to start exercising. I got to get in better shape. Nope. No. Did he do other utterly ridiculous things that could not only get me hurt, but also get him hurt again? Absolutely. Okay. One time he was with me and I was dealing with a domestic dispute in the subway, and the guy put his hands on the woman, and I told him he was under arrest, and he started resisting, and I dropped him with a joint lock, and as I'm bending him in a pretzel, the sergeant's grabbing me, telling me, easy, easy, right? I handcuffed the guy, and right in front of the criminal, I turned to the sergeant and I said, don't you ever put your effing hands on me when I'm defending myself and dealing with a criminal. Don't you ever touch me. And he was like, okay. Another time I was driving that same sergeant, and we get a cab, pulls us over, a yellow cab, says, listen, I think they're robbing. There was a store called Fat Albert's, right, based on the old comic book. They sold clothing and sneakers and stuff. It was in, I believe it was in the A3 precinct, so it was in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And the cab pulls up and says, listen, I just saw guys, they're trying to break into Fat Albert's. And it was a pretty big, store. So we pull over, and sure enough, we see guys trying to get the gate, and we see two guys on the roof up top that had climbed up top. And we're like, okay, what do we got here? So we swing the car around, we get out, I take my gun out. Okay. You don't know what you're dealing with here. You got guys up. You don't know if they have, you don't know what you're dealing with. Well, let me explain something to you again in the world of real violence. If the criminal has his gun out already and yours is still holstered, he has a huge advantage over you in a gunfight. Huge advantage. Okay? So you go to a crime where there's a potential for violence, a burglary, a robbery, a rape. In my day, we had our gun in our hand. Like in this situation with Fat Albert's, with what we thought was a robbery, I took my gun out. I'm not pointing my gun at people. I have it down at my side. But it's not much to just bring it up, right? The sergeant tells me to holster my weapon. I ignored him the first time. He tells me again to holster my weapon. I said, no. Now I take them at gunpoint. I get everybody down, and it turns out they actually owned the store, and they'd locked themselves out. They had ID. They showed. We ran, and we knew who they were. It was, okay, everything was good, But at that point, my weapons holstered, and we're good. We're good, right? And we get in the car. And as soon as we get in the car, I turned to the sergeant and I said, listen, don't you ever tell me when I feel danger. You cannot give me a direct order and tell me that I don't feel danger. And if you have a problem with the way I do police work, don't have me drive you. Okay? So I use this as an example of explaining to you, because here's a guy who's in a profession where violence becomes normal, where you see things and see people do things to other human beings that you're like, my God, this is just unbelievable. Like the utter disregard some people have for their fellow human beings. And unless you've experienced that for real, it's very hard for me to explain to you what it's like. Okay. Unless you've been shot at, unless you've been attacked by multiple opponents, unless you've, had guys, like I was lucky I was never in a shootout, but I had guys try to pull guns on me. They never got the gun out. I trapped their hand and I eliminated the threat. They never got it out. I had guys reach in. I had a guy reach in and try to pull 2 knives out on me. So he's going to be coming at me with a knife in each hand. I trapped both hands in the pocket, took them out. Okay? When I removed the 2 knives, they were razor sharp, right? So again, and it's funny I say that because the founder of Ishinru had knife techniques where someone would come at you with 2 knives. And initially when I saw those, I thought they were kind of silly. And then here I am in the world of real violence, and I'm on a moving train, folks. And the guy goes to pull out 2 knives on me. So we prepare in the dojo the world of make-believe violence so that if, God forbid, we engage in real-world violence, we're able to survive that encounter. So I've been lucky. My dojo, probably from 1988 to 1995 or 1997, was a combat laboratory. And what do I mean by that? So, be finishing the kids' classes, and after the kids' class, we go right into the adult class. So, the guys would come a little early, 15 minutes, 20 minutes early. I always had help with the kids' classes. So, one of the guys that was a police officer would walk in and say, "Hey, Sensei, you got a minute?" "Yeah." And he'd say, "Yeah, so this is what happened last night. I had this guy square off with me. This is how he came at me. This is what I did." And I'd be like, all right, we'll go over it in class. So the class became like this laboratory where we were analyzing actual combat situations. Now, again, when I say this, I'm talking about empty hand, or maybe a guy coming at you with a weapon, or multiple opponents, right? We're not talking about analyzing gunfights. That's a very different thing. This is a martial arts school. We're training in martial arts, right? To be able to defend ourselves in real situations. So my school, for a long time, that's what it was about. My school was never about, well, I want to do well in a sparring tournament. And if you think you winning a sparring tournament means that you can translate that type of BS fighting into an actual combat situation, yeah, you might, but I could tell you again, you might not. Because no real fight I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen hundreds of them. I've been in hundreds of them, so I've probably seen 1,000 of them. You don't think as a police officer you're riding on a train and it's pulling out, and you might see 2 guys fighting, or you're on an overpass and you look down and far, but you see they're fighting. You see tons of real fights. Okay, so that idea that we were able to bring that into the dojo. And even the civilian students were like, off in their faces were like, "What do you mean the guy attacked you like that? What do you mean there were 2 guys, right?" So it became where we were able to take those things that happened in a real violent world, and we can analyze them and work on them in the dojo. And then maybe if it didn't work so well. Let's say the guy came in and said, I tried to do this, but I had a really hard time. It didn't work, so I went to this. First off, if he told me that, I'd say, great. But then what we do is we analyze and see maybe why that didn't work. And this is something we did for a long time. So if you want to be successful in real violence, you got to pressure test a little bit in the dojo, but you can't do it to the point where someone's going to get hurt unless 2 people agree. Well, if one of us gets hurt, okay, but I want to know. I want you to try to punch me in the face with a big looping punch and try to knock my head off as hard as you can. I want to see if I can defend against it. And, if you're not doing that kind of stuff in the dojo, well, you're probably going to be in for a bit of surprise when that person really throws that punch at you really, really fast and violently in the street. So in closing, I just want to say, we really must learn to separate the 2 realities. The reality of violence, which is, if you think you're going to do pressure point strikes in one of these violent encounters, you're living in a fantasy world. Your superior violence is going to have to stop his violence, okay? You must train in a way where you're going to be able to deal with the types of attacks you'll deal with for real, not, these fake karate attacks. How many people were like this against me and came in with a karate punch? The answer is nobody, ever, okay? So it's important to work on that and understand the difference between what real violence actually is. It's incredibly scary. It's incredibly, there's a lot of different things that go on with you, and you want to understand that so you're prepared for it when hopefully maybe that one time it happens and you have to save yourself. Hope you enjoyed this one. Please consider becoming a member. $2.99 a month. You get all kinds of videos, a lot of extra things. You get this podcast commercial free, earlier than everybody else. And please, if you liked it, click the like and share button. It really helps. The channel, like I said, is growing. I appreciate everybody that's been subscribing and becoming members. It's great. And like I said, I look forward to doing more in the future. All right. Take care. See you in the next one.